Hi, I'm Ray Lampe, Dr. Barbecue. This recipe is for burnt ends. All the rage in the barbecue world these days, burnt ends. This is how you make them. This is the brisket point. Brisket's got two muscles, the flat and the point, and for burnt ends we use the point. It's the only way to do it. So I'm going to move this flat away. The meat cutter split this for me. I'm going to have to trim it up though. So this point muscle, the meat cutter split it for me, but he didn't trim it up very well, which is fine, because the fat's all pretty predictable. It's right up on top. You'll see if you just take your time, good sharp knife, and cut off a little bit at a time, and you'll find it. It's one muscle under here somewhere. It's just oddly shaped. So just take your time and trim. You can see the texture of it though, how different it is. Now all of this fat, this is when you're cutting a whole brisket or cooking a whole brisket, this is all the fat that's in between the two muscles. So in this case, because we've split it, now we get the chance to trim it all out. And for burnt ends, we want to do a little bit different cooking process. So I'm going to trim pretty much all the fat off of this. Don't drive yourself crazy. If there's a little bit of fat left, it's going to cook and it's going to help everything taste good. But in general, I want to trim this to pretty much bald. You see the texture of this? It's really different. It's got a lot of grain and a lot of marbled fat within. I think that's why everybody likes it so much, because it makes it taste good. You see, it's a pretty oddly shaped piece of meat once you get it out. This is pretty much the whole thing of what it should look like. Now this is the top. This would be the top of the brisket. And normally I wouldn't trim this if I were cooking the whole brisket, but since we're doing burnt ends, I'm going to. Just take your time and cut a little piece at a time so you don't gouge into the meat. All right, that's going to be good enough. I'm not going to worry about all these little pieces that are left. So that's what a brisket point looks like, all trimmed up. This is how you make burnt ends. I'm going to put a little oil on it just to make the rub stick. And this is the Big Green Egg Sweet and Smoky rub. I'm going to put a lot of this. I want a nice crusty outside on this. Now there's no fat on this, so it doesn't really matter which way you cook it. You might flip it over about halfway. But I'm going to prepare the egg to cook at 275 with the convector in there, indirect. A little bit of oak or hickory wood, good solid smoke for it. About 4 to 5 hours till it's 160. My egg's rolling about 275 with some hickory smoke. This is my brisket point. I'm going to put it on for about 4 or 5 hours till it reaches an internal temp of 160. My brisket point's been cooking about 5 hours now. Nice and slow, nice bark on it. But you can see it's not done yet. So I'm going to wrap it up now in butcher paper just to hurry it along. The butcher paper works out really well. It's just so, and you see what happens? It sort of soaks up the grease, and then the grease is just sitting on it, sort of basting it. It works out perfect. So now I'm going to cook this probably another hour and a half to 2 hours, but you want to keep taking the temp. I want it 185 to 190, no higher. My brisket point is ready to turn into burnt ends now. But the first thing I'm going to do is make the sauce. Burnt ends for me are saucy. Some people will serve them without sauce. I don't think that's the right way to do it. So I'm going to make a sauce. First thing is a cup of brown sugar. It's going to be sweet. It's going to be a little sweet and sticky and kind of gooey. Then we're going to put a cup of barbecue sauce. This is the Big Green Egg Kansas City Sweet and Smoky barbecue sauce. A cup of that. And then about a half a cup of beef broth, just to kind of thin it out. We don't really want just a full-on barbecue sauce texture to it. You want to have a little bit of a gravy kind of thing. All right, so I'm going to let this warm up and let the sugar get melted while I cut the burnt ends. All right, now we're going to get after the meat. This is that brisket point that we trimmed up and seasoned up and cooked a couple different ways, and looks great. So see what happens when you wrap in the butcher paper. You see how this, all the juices and the fat, it just kind of hangs in with it. It doesn't steam it so much, but it stays right with it. It looks great. So this is not really done. You could eat it, but it'd be a little tough right now. But that's perfect because we got another step to make. Well, to make burnt ends, we've got to cut this into cubes. So first slice it, probably a little over an inch. I think an inch might be a little too small. I don't mind if they're like 2 biters is kind of how I think about it. So now we'll take it and trim it. If you see a little extra fat that's not going to cook off, this is the time to trim it. And like I said, think about a 2-bite piece. And it's going to shrink up a little bit too. And they won't all be the perfect little squares. That's okay. Pretty sure they're all going to get eaten. All right, now I go back to my gravy, my burnt end sauce. It's great, the sugar's melted, that's right where I want it now. And then just put these in. All right, so you just want to toss these with the sauce now, get them all coated. And you can see they're still a little springy, but that's fine. So I'm just going to let this cook. About every 20-30 minutes, stir it. Probably going to take an hour and a half or so to get done, but toss them every now and then just to make sure they stay coated. The sauce will reduce down and the squares will get nice and tender, and then they're burnt ends. My burnt ends are done. No need to rest these. When they come out, they're ready to go. What you want to do though is cook them till you can tell the meat's tender. So don't even be afraid to reach in and feel it, or use a poker and feel it. And the sauce has kind of gotten glazed all over them, just like this. You can see, this is what I want. They don't look the same, do they? That's exactly what they should look like now. Beautiful. These are going to be sweet and sticky and tender, and this the point of the brisket is just a different kind of meat. It's going to have a texture to it, just great stuff. There you go. These are real burnt ends, except no substitutes.